Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Baker Center for Public Policy. My name is Krista Wiegand. I am the director of the Global Security Program here at the Baker Center. And I'm sorry the weather is not as great, but we're delighted to have you all here. So I would like to welcome you to our Ashe lecture this evening. This lecture is part of the Global Security Program, which seeks to address national and international security threats and solutions through policy-relevant research and education with a global perspective. The Ashe Lecture was established with a gift from former Knoxville mayor and U.S. ambassador to Poland, Victor Ashe. Ashe received his BA from Yale University in 1967 and later his law degree from here at University of Tennessee in 1974. To this day, Ashe was the longest serving mayor for the city of Knoxville, serving 16 years. In 2009, when he was honored by Polish President Lech Kaczynski with the Commander's Cross with Star of the Order of the Merit for the Republic of Poland for his contribution to Polish-American relations. For this lecture series, ambassadors and mayors are invited to speak on a variety of policy matters, including foreign relations, diplomacy, world affairs, and local government. Through their experience, they discuss their insights into topics which fulfill the center's educational mission. So I will, in a moment, bring Ambassador Ashe to the lectern, but before I do so, I want to let you know about two upcoming events that are related to global security. The first is this Wednesday, March 9th at 12 p.m. It is a virtual-only event, so you can tune in online. It is called One Year Review, Assessing the Biden Administration's Foreign Policy. It is going to be moderated by myself, and I will be meeting with John Rader, who is a UT alum, both bachelor's degree and his law degree here. He was deputy assistant to President Trump for strategic initiatives at the White House. He also was chief of staff for our Senator Bill Hagerty. So that will be Wednesday, and if you go to our calendar online, you'll find the link. On March 22nd at 5 p.m. here in the same auditorium and also online, streaming live, we'll have Mike Christian, who is a vice president for the Africa region for a global contracting company called Reliant, that's based here just down the street in Maryville. And he'll be speaking about how global contractors in the U.S. support U.S. foreign policy in Africa. So without further ado, I'll welcome Ambassador Ashe.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for everyone else being here this evening. Let me also say, if you're looking ahead, mark your calendar for May 2. We're going to have a second Ashe Lecture Series this year. Former Ambassador Masha Yananovich, who is the American ambassador to Ukraine, and who was unceremoniously sent home by President Trump for apparently not getting enough information on Hunter Biden. But she will be our speaker on May 2, and I think you'll find her very interesting. She also has a book coming out in another week or so. We also have a number of distinguished guests here that I want to recognize. Our former Chancellor, Jimmy Cheek, is here. Our former Mayor, Randy Tyree, is here. Knox County trustee and former commissioner and city council member and everything else is here. Carl Pierce, former director of the Baker Center, and Earl Sharp, former state senator, is here as well. And Finbar Saunders, former vice mayor and longtime council member of the city. It's a real pleasure to have Ken Weinstein, who I got to know because we both served at separate times on the Broadcasting Board of Governors, which at that time ran Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, and Middle Eastern Broadcasting Network, and basically operate our overseas information projects of the United States government. But Dr. Weinstein was the CEO of the Hudson Institute from 2011 through 2020, one of the premier think tank groups in the United States that deals particularly with foreign policy issues and works closely with Democrats and Republicans alike, which probably accounts for the fact that when he was nominated to be ambassador to Japan, in 2020, he was unanimously, and that doesn't happen very often, recommended out by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, both Democrats and Republicans supporting him. Unfortunately for him, the then president's term was ending and expired before the Senate could confirm him. But he has a strong record for bipartisanship, which I think in this day and age, and particularly being at the Howard Baker Center, is very important and relevant. So it's a great pleasure for me to welcome to Knoxville, his first visit to East Tennessee, and to the Baker Center, Ken Weinstein.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you, Victor. Thank you, Ambassador Ashe. I'm delighted to be here, delighted to be giving one of the Ashe lectures here at the Baker Center, especially to be recognized by such a distinguished public servant who's left such a legacy, not just here in Knoxville as mayor, in Warsaw as ambassador, but also on the broadcasting board, where Victor was known as he's known here as a forthright and straightforward and tough advocate for the policies that need to be done. And so it means a lot to me. I'm also honored to be speaking at the Baker Center. Howard Baker, who I knew a little bit, was a great U.S. Senator, great majority leader, great White House Chief of Staff, and I had hoped to follow in his footsteps as ambassador to Japan, where he served with such distinction. He left behind not just a legacy of immense service, but more importantly, a legacy of decency, humility, kind of person who would work closely with people he disagreed with fundamentally for our nation's benefit. And I think it's important that the Center here continues the legacy, and I'm delighted to be here and thank Professor Wiegand and the staff here at the Baker Center. Let me just note that my talk today was originally going to be on the Biden administration Asia policy challenges. The world has changed in the last couple of weeks, so I'll say a few things, and I'll try to weave in the various global challenges that the administration faces before we open it up to Q&A. Look, the Biden administration is the third of four recent, arguably perhaps the fourth administration in a row that has come to office thinking that Asia would be its priority policy theater globally. But as at least two of three past administrations have learned, you can think through a strategy, you can want to have a strategy, but as the expression in Yiddish goes, man plans, but God laughs. And whether it be 9/11, whether it be changing President Bush's presidency fundamentally, whether it be the security challenges that arose with the return of ISIS for President Obama when he had planned to pivot to Asia, the world really does change. Today, unfortunately, we really can't laugh. We're living in historic and dangerous times. Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine will have deep reverberations, and I'll return to this in a second, not just in Europe, but also in Asia as well. So let me begin, first of all, by kind of going through the background to the Biden administration's Asia policy, and I'll begin first by examining the Trump administration's Asia policy, and I'm as my friend Victor tells me, and I'll make this very clear, I am talking in policy terms. I'm putting aside my own political views and personal preferences here. At the end of the day, I think that there was much disagreement about President Trump and his foreign policy, but there was actually not much disagreement about his general view on China. There was a broad bipartisan consensus that emerged, and President Trump really led the way on this, I have to say, heralding the end of the view that economic engagement with China would lead to liberalization of China. The president was focused originally mostly on trade President Trump was when he came into office, but his concerns about the China challenge expanded throughout the time he was in office, and especially during COVID, but even beforehand. And this was as much a reaction to what President Xi in China was up to. Xi Jinping obviously had made increasing territorial demands on his neighbors in Asia, built artificial islands in the South China Sea, has led a massive crackdown on internal dissent in China, has built a surveillance state, as we've seen, particularly in Xinjiang and Tibet, and placed over 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps, separating them from their families, taken over Hong Kong. In addition to massive intellectual property thefts and violations of the global trading order that China was so well known for. Now, Trump recognized the mercantilist China threat early on, but also came to increasingly understand that China posed a different kind of threat to the United States, which was to our leadership in technology, particularly in 5G, next generation telephony, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, biotechnology, and quantum, among other areas. And in particular, China has tried to use its own 5G systems through Huawei, a state-sponsored company, to try to put a global surveillance system in place through its telephony systems. Now, in addition to trying to sort of control the setting up as a global system that would allow for surveillance through this telephone system, and obviously also China also at the same time, you'll recall, tried to set up a broad infrastructure program, the One Belt, One Road program, designed to make sure that all roads from everywhere led to Beijing, to sort of get everybody into China's operating system as well. And the notion was there were massive demands for infrastructure, particularly in Southeast Asia, but in Africa, and the Chinese government was there to help, as we eventually learned through confiscatory loans that often came into force through bribery of officials and the like. All of these things, however, posed a real challenge to the United States. And one, I think the Trump administration did a relatively decent job meeting this challenge. The president, widely criticized for not being alliance friendly. I think it's an overstatement. He believed in the Sunni Arab-Israel alliance in the Middle East and worked to build it. He was certainly frustrated with NATO and most especially frustrated with Germany. But in Asia, he had a much better track record on alliances. His closest partner in Asia was Prime Minister Abe of Japan. They bonded early on, and before his presidency, they bonded when Prime Minister Abe visited the president at Trump Tower in November of 2016. They bonded over the North Korea threat. They spoke just about every month the president was in office. They met dozens of times. And even Kurt Campbell, who is President Biden's Indo-Pacific coordinator, said publicly on numerous occasions that this is the model for engaging Japanese leaders, what President Trump did with Prime Minister Abe, which is to spend a lot of time together personally, get to know each other well, to build a strategic relationship. Now, the President Trump took from Prime Minister Abe's major strategic concept. It was called the Free and Open Indo-Pacific. This was the notion that Asia has to be understood as not simply the Pacific Ocean, but has to be understood as running from the Indian Ocean all the way to the Pacific Ocean to the coast of the United States, and that in this region, we need to push for economic development, for greater regional connectedness, for technology uncompromised by state surveillance systems, for reciprocal trade and development. And Prime Minister Abe announced this concept at a 2016 conference in Kenya, where he also called for freedom of navigation, particularly in the South China Sea, which is increasingly under the control of the Chinese Navy. And President Trump very quickly signed on to the Free and Open Indo-Pacific as the United States strategic doctrine, going back to a meeting that the president had with the Prime Minister at Mar-a-Lago in early 2017. It's rare when the United States adopts strategic doctrines of other countries. But the president signed on to it, and the administration signed on to it, trying to find a counter to One Belt, One Road. And so President Trump spoke in Vietnam at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum in late 2017, and challenging China's view on One Belt, One Road, talked about many roads that could be taken in Asia, many roads to prosperity in particular. And as Japan had its own version of the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, that was a strategy primarily for Japan focused on economic development in the ASEAN countries that include Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, but also the South Pacific countries, the smaller island countries of South Pacific, which found themselves under increasing pressure from China to accept some of these loans in exchange for infrastructure. And so the United States rethought its economic development assistance, restructuring its economic development assistance agencies to meet the challenge of One Belt, One Road by standing up what's called the Development Finance Corporation, which would have $60 billion, massive amount to invest in infrastructure, particularly in Southeast Asia and the Pacific Island countries, to meet the China challenge. And at the same time, Japan started to invest very heavily in its in national security and defense, buying a record number of F-35 fighters, refitting its helicopter carriers to be aircraft carriers and the like. So we saw this moment of strategic alignment. Japan became more focused on defense. We became more focused on economic development. And we also, as a country, took the U.S.-Japan cooperation to third parties, and particularly with Australia, developed all sorts of new mechanisms to promote economic development, to promote energy security, to promote trustworthy infrastructure, both concrete infrastructure and also 5G and other forms of infrastructure for both for the nations of the free and open Indo-Pacific, and also for the nations of the Pacific Island nations, the ASEAN countries that needed it, but also countries in Latin America we worked together on. And similarly, under the Trump administration, we saw the rebirth of the Quad, the informal coordination body that includes Australia, Japan, India, and the United States. And the Quad had its first ministerial meeting, foreign ministers meeting in Tokyo in October of 2020. We saw also in the Trump administration, in the attempt to fight against Huawei's domination of 5G systems, over 60 countries signed on to the Clean Path program to reject Huawei and its 5G systems and its core. Now, all of these things, except for the Clean Path program that fought against Huawei, happened. I guess Huawei and the Quad meeting happened before COVID. And at that moment, I think we saw an even deeper transformation about understanding in our country and elsewhere about the China challenge, when China was less than transparent about the origins of COVID, which it either was directly responsible for, which I believe, a global pandemic that killed 6 million people since December of 2019, or at least had been less than transparent about the origins of the virus and the massive economic misery and pain that it caused around the world. So, the Trump administration, for all its important efforts, we saw, nonetheless, growing security threats to Taiwan, to the Philippines and Japan. The high-tech threat that, though the 5G threat was less serious than it was at the outset of the administration, there were still significant whole-of-society threats that exist, obviously to health, to our supply chains, which became apparent during COVID, to computer chip manufacturing, to access to precious metals, which China has so much of, and the like, to precious minerals and the like. So the Trump team was successful in getting us started and making major steps in transforming the vision of China and what we needed to do in the Indo-Pacific. And the Biden team came in and actually had this view that, and if you talk to them one-on-one privately, they would tell you, look, Trump got US-Japan right, he got China generally right, and he also did something very important, which was opening the door to increased public engagement with Taiwan. The Taiwan Relations Act, which came into effect in 1979 and governs our official relations with Taiwan, had been too strictly interpreted for decades to prevent us from having public, open interaction with Taiwanese officials. The Trump administration changed that, sending our HHS secretary to Taiwan for a meeting during the COVID crisis. And the Biden administration continued this, inviting Taiwan's de facto ambassador in Washington, Shelby Kim, to attend the inauguration, which would have been unheard of beforehand. But the Biden administration, though, had some significant shifts from the Trump administration. First of all, they viewed China within a different framework. They viewed China within the framework of what the Biden team called the authoritarianism versus democracy framework, which is how they characterized the foreign policy challenges the United States faces, and they lumped China together with Russia on that. They also viewed that there was significant need for cooperation as well as competition with China. And for the Biden team, there was no area of cooperation that's more important than on fighting climate change, which is an issue that wasn't a priority for the Trump administration. And there have been times when even the most hardline anti-China folks in the Biden administration will say that cooperation on climate trumps all their issues for us in the U.S.-China relationship. But most importantly, the Biden team had a notion that they were going to seek cooperation from U.S. allies in order to focus on Asia, that this was the key to how they were going to handle things, that the great strength in their mind of the United States, and for good reason, is our alliance system, our partnership system, and the argument was, let's go work with our European allies to help us, particularly in Asia, and we also will withdraw from Afghanistan, and that will also allow us to focus more on Asia. Now, there's some things the Biden team, I think, did very well. They held the first Quad head of government summit virtually. They held another one in person. They took the Quad from an informal discussion group with some military exercises to a much tighter focus, particularly on vaccine development and public health in Southeast Asia, to a focus on secure supply chain, which is necessary in the competition with China, to a focus on climate change, computer chips, and the like. But the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan and the defeat of the greatest fighting force in the world has ever known sent all the wrong signals, both to Asia and Europe for that matter. Our European allies were just livid with us for the lack of an immediate heads up on the situation regarding the withdrawal. They viewed our credibility as badly damaged. Our intelligence, which said that the government in Afghanistan would stand for a while, is very faulty. And moreover, the fact that we were so willing to abandon our Afghan allies sent bad signals, not just to the Taiwanese who might be fighting for their own freedom someday, but also to the ASEAN countries who have many of which hedge between the United States and China. Many of them stand with us on key issues, but recognize that they are right in China's backyard, and so their freedom of flexibility to deal with China is limited. In addition, the second disaster was the idea of trusting Angela Merkel, which President Biden did during her final visit to the White House. She asked the president to remove all sanctions on Nord Stream 2, which he did. And without any pressure in return, either for arming Ukraine, for building LNG terminals that President Trump had asked her to do, or to meet Germany's pledge to spend 2% on defense, which it had made during the Wales NATO summit. So all of these things sent the wrong signals to Moscow, as did a visit by CIA Director Burns right after the disastrous Afghan withdrawal seeking Russian cooperation. And President Putin took this as a sign of an America in rapid decline, as did Xi Jinping as well. And for the Chinese in particular, this These events occurred after the initial meeting in Alaska, if you'll recall, where Secretary Blinken and National Security Advisor Sullivan met with their Chinese counterparts, and the Americans, in all honesty, had a difficult time defending our country and our principles in the face of aggressive attacks from the Chinese. I will say, in the aftermath of the Afghan debacle, the Biden administration seized upon a wonderful opportunity that presented itself. The Australia-UK-US Security Partnership, or AUKUS, an idea that was hatched really by the Australians in partnership with the Brits. The idea being that the United States and the United Kingdom would sell nuclear-powered submarines to Australia that could get to the South China Sea much faster than conventional submarines that the Australians were under contract with the French to purchase. And the idea would be that this would alter the strategic equation in the South China Sea in particular, where Taiwan is situated, and would also help defend other countries in the region from potential Chinese aggression. In addition, the AUKUS agreement had other codicils that would create the most high-tech defensive alliance ever on quantum computing, artificial intelligence, cyber, and other critical defense technologies. Now, the agreement was very important because it showed the reliability of the United States, that we were still the most sought-after ally in the world, even after the Afghan debacle. But it came at a cost. Obviously, the French were quite upset with us, and you remember the challenges we faced there. But in addition, the submarines will not be available. They can't be manufactured before 2040, so it's really kind of hard to say what this will do for overall deterrence in the short to medium term in the Indo-Pacific. Let me now turn quickly to the Biden administration's view of the Indo-Pacific strategy. In general, their view is that they are focusing on deterrence through AUKUS in particular, but their view is that, and by the increasing U.S. presence in the Pacific, but that the United States needs a positive Indo-Pacific agenda, not just a negative one directed at China. And they especially want an agenda directed at the ASEAN countries, whom I mentioned, who sometimes tilt between the United States and China. To show how serious the administration was about its Indo-Pacific strategy, Secretary of State Blinken traveled to Fiji, which is about the furthest place from Washington on this planet, to unveil the Biden administration's Indo-Pacific strategy during the Pacific Island Nations Summit. These are the tiny island nations of the South Pacific, countries like Papua New Guinea, Palau, the Solomon Islands, et cetera. And he also traveled to Australia for an in-person meeting of the Quad foreign ministers. Now, one of the key items in the Biden administration's China agenda, you should know, is that it is explicit about not trying to change China. President Trump tried to do this through his Phase 1 trade deal, which was going to put, if it had really worked, the original deal, which the Chinese later rejected, but they had agreed to at first, was going to put very tight controls against China engaging in any kind of intellectual property theft whatsoever. The idea being that this would really sort of force fundamental changes to the Chinese economy. And secondly, there was a view voiced primarily by Secretary of State Pompeo, but also by Vice President Pence, among others, targeting the Chinese Communist Party in particular as a problem and as a threat to freedom in China. But the Biden administration has dropped this kind of criticism of China, and instead what they are doing is they say they are trying to change the environment in which China operates in rather than trying to change China. And this is part of their attempts to engage with China, is how I'd read it, particularly on the climate issue. And it was something that was deeply, certainly appreciated by Xi Jinping, who took this change of U.S. strategy to be very positive and as a sort of a vote, voice of confidence in his own leadership. At least he told his own people that. There are 5 main points of the Indo-Pacific strategy. I'll go over it pretty quickly. The first is to advance freedom and openness, that we're going to work with our partners and allies to promote democratic values, freedom of the press, and the like. Secondly, to build capacity and infrastructure in the region and beyond through the Build Back Better World program that the Biden administration so humbly decided to rename I guess it was the Blue Dot Network that the Trump administration had called, and instead the Biden team decided to go with the campaign slogan of Build Back Better. It may be the only place we see a Build Back Better program actually having an impact, depending on what happens in our Congress. Thirdly, promoting shared prosperity and trade through the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which is going to try to set standards for the digital economy and technology, supply chain resiliency, decarbonization and clean energy, worker standards, infrastructure, and the like. Fourth, the focus is going to be on Indo-Pacific security, and it's interesting that it's that low of a priority in terms of the way that the strategy is framed. And fifth is building resilience to pandemics and to climate change. Now, this is a solid workmanlike agenda. Certainly, the strategy was criticized for not being as original or as not being as original, and that it could have had a lot more meat on the bones and the like. But I think there's a real point the administration has to trying to attract the ASEAN countries and those countries in Asia who are hedging between the United States and China. But moving security to the fourth item and implicitly accepting the legitimacy of the Communist Party may not be the strongest way to do things. So let me start to wrap things up. We're obviously in the midst of a growing strategic competition over principles, technologies, sovereignty, freedom of navigation in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. And if anything, this competition has been heightened by Russia's once unimaginable invasion of Ukraine, as well as the brave response of Ukraine's citizens and its armed forces, which have done so much to transform the willingness of so many to defend the global order over the past 2 weeks. Now, President Biden and his team, in my opinion, have had a slow start on Ukraine. They cut off weapons sales. They tried to engage Vladimir Putin rather than building up Ukraine's defenses. They were willing to make major concessions to Russia, including on NATO accession for Ukraine. But they've done a decent job in working with allies, partners, and nations around the world to impose sanctions that I think really do need to go further and to rally support for Ukraine. We've seen a slumbering Europe awoken to the geostrategic challenge, characterized most especially by Chancellor Scholz of Germany, who has decided not simply to halt Nord Stream 2, but to arm Ukraine and to meet Germany's pledge to spend 2% on national security, 2% of GDP in short order. We've seen the EU take an unprecedented and active role in Ukraine's defense through subventions. And we've seen, obviously, this extraordinary set of partnerships with countries around the world, not just our Asian allies, but heck, even Switzerland is now heavily sanctioning Russia, its central bank and its banking system. Now, Russia's action and the outcome of the fighting in Ukraine is very much up in the air, and we can get into this in the discussion, but it has a direct correlation to the fate of the free and open Indo-Pacific. Citizens of democracy who have been averse to defending our principles now understand that the unimaginable can be quite imaginable when authoritarian revanchist regimes decide to act. Now, I look at Japan in particular, which is the country I know best in the region. This has been a transformative year for Japan. The so-called Taiwan scenario, if Taiwan is attacked by China, was once reserved for the halls of the Japanese government ministries, but has become over the last year a subject of major public discussion, with a significant number of past and current officials noting that a Taiwan scenario is a Japan scenario, meaning that Japan's defense and national security is immediately at risk if Taiwan is attacked. And so this awakeness, especially after the People's Republic of China's takeover of Hong Kong, has led to a greater focus on the security threat posed by the PRC in all domains, from cyber to nuclear to maritime and beyond. And fortunately, to counterbalance the China challenge, the United States and its democratic allies are taking the concerted action that we've heard of through the Quad, through AUKUS, trying to forestall dangers, whether through supply chain, secure 5G communications, computer chips and the like, or to take action to face the growing presence of the Chinese, the PLA Navy in the South and East China Seas. And AUKUS, which the Biden administration has helped pull together, especially its side codicils, will lead to the strongest possible collaboration in the technologies critical to integrating military capabilities across naval, cyber, artificial intelligence, quantum, and other domains, which will, I believe, make significant strides in closing the potential qualitative gap we face against the Chinese Navy focused on next-generation technologies through civil-military fusion. Most importantly, now that Europe is increasingly focused on its own defense and Germany is willing to use its economic and technological might, apparently, to promote international security, America may actually have the opportunity to increasingly focus on the Indo-Pacific, which remains the principal theater of American security operations. Now, it was, I think, very wrong for a number of analysts, conservatives and liberals, to argue that we shouldn't focus on Afghanistan or Ukraine in order to focus on Asia. All of these things are interlinked. Authoritarians are watching all U.S. actions and all the actions of our allies more closely. And the good news is, I believe China is now spooked. Its no-limits friendship with Russia shows real limits. The elements of a complete surprise PRC takeover of Taiwan, I think, is off the table. But just as Chinese strategists studied the example of the Gulf War, as well as the collapse of the Soviet Union for decades, to draw lessons for the People's Republic of China and the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, they will focus on what Russia got wrong in Ukraine and what the lessons are for reunifying Taiwan. Taiwan was never reunified with the mainland to begin with, which Xi Jinping still believes is key to the great rejuvenation of the Chinese people. The United States and our allies, in turn, will increasingly forward position forces. We will train Taiwanese forces the way that our special forces have done an absolutely superb job training the Ukrainian armed forces as they resist Russian aggression. And I think Vladimir Putin's recklessness has empowered the people of Taiwan, people of Japan, the hedging nations in Southeast Asia as well, to understand that the unthinkable could happen in their neighborhood as well. And so eventually I believe that the United States is going to have to expand its networked alliance to include the US, Japan, and Taiwan all together, working together to improve contingency planning, intelligence sharing, and the like, in order to fend off a potential Chinese attack. This is complicated. Japan doesn't have formal diplomatic relations with Taiwan, but this needs to be done. Look, in the end, deterrence is key. Deterrence was key. We failed to deter the Russians in Ukraine. We failed to deter the Taliban, which we could have done, I believe, with the right amount of willpower and the right kind of creative strategy. But in short, I believe the Biden administration's Indo-Pacific strategy, but also its efforts to rally democracies against authoritarianism, may have been paradoxically aided by the failure to prevent the invasion of Ukraine. The world's eyes are now open. The world's hearts are now open to what's going on in Ukraine. And this means that with the global attention, the media attention on the horrors of this war, of the kinds of actions that authoritarian leaders have taken, well, we need to continue to keep our eyes on Europe, and we also need to keep our eyes on the very dangerous neighborhood of the Middle East. We also need to keep our eyes also focused on Asia. We need to keep our eyes on all these places simultaneously to help meet the China challenge, which is not simply a security challenge, but an economic challenge, a technological challenge, and a societal challenge. Thank you very much.
Okay, at this time, we'll take questions. And are there microphones around? Okay, there, please wait till somebody brings you a microphone so everyone can hear. Thank you.
Well, thank you, sir. Andrew Muhammad with the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics. As the Trans-Pacific Partnership sort of touted as a way in which sort of the U.S., at least in a trade policy and trade sense, could sort of be a checkmate in that region relative to China. Obviously, President Trump withdrew. And you still have sort of the remaining countries in negotiating the CPTPP. Yes, but you really don't hear any talk about seriously considering rejoining, which seems to me would be the easiest route, at least in a trade sense, to have real inroads in the Asian region.
I agree with you 100%. President Trump's concern was on that China could get in to the through the back door on the that is to say that Chinese manufacturing facilities could be in some of these Southeast Asian countries, and that China there were domestic content provisions. They needed to be stronger. I think we're now at a stage. The Japanese did a superb job. Prime Minister Abe did a superb job rallying the 11 nations that joined the CPTPP. And it would be a sign of real seriousness about engagement with China, engagement against China, that if we were to re-enter, particularly because it would allow us to set serious standards, as you note, and it would be very, very positive in a whole range of areas. Taiwan is also seeking to be included, as is China, and at a certain point, Chinese pressure, China might be able to force its way in, and we know what China does when it comes to trading standards. We see what it's done in the World Trade Organization when it just breaks every single rule possible and escapes, most forms of most of the penalties incurred. So it would really break the CPTPP if China came in. It would be good, for the Biden administration to push this agenda. It's something that is not popular at all, though, in the House and Senate as of now.
Oh, ready for the next question? Okay. Most of your discussion has been focused on China and our foreign policy with China, which makes sense because they're a very powerful country with a lot of global influence. But I'd actually like to ask a question about another country in South Asia. How would you compare the Trump's foreign policy to Biden's foreign policy in regards to Pakistan?
Boy, whew. Look, Trump's foreign policy on Pakistan was very uneven. He came in and over time realized that he could not trust the Pakistanis as a reliable ally in fighting terror, thought he was not being given a straightforward answer by the Pakistani government, and moved to and felt that Pakistan, moved to tilt very heavily towards India and to be very critical of the Pakistani government. And he cut off military assistance and other things to Pakistan. But once the Khan government was elected in Pakistan, the president did a kind of not quite a 180, but pretty close to it, where he started talking about even bringing in the Pakistanis to help, where he worked to negotiate with the Pakistanis to resolve the situation in Kashmir in India. So the Biden administration has the policies, their Afghan withdrawal has put them in a situation where we need cooperation from Pakistan, and so we're continuing to draw closer to the Pakistanis. Unclear, we know that the ISI in Pakistan, the intelligence services, are highly compromised and not friends of the United States. They worked against us when we tried to get bin Laden. So we seem to be making the same mistake once again.
We have a question from online, and then we'll go to this question here.
Okay, so the first guest says, congratulations on a great talk. Do you think there will be a major move to rearm Japan? And will talk about pushing the U.S. forces out of Japan lessen?
There is a major move to rearm Japan. The Japanese have announced that they're going to spend 2% on defense spending in the coming 2% of GDP on defense spending. They now spend about 1.1%. This is a major increase. They realize the challenge that they face, and they are taking this challenge very seriously. There's been a deep transformation that has occurred in Japan over the last decade or so. Japan used to have the kind of multilateral foreign policy that Germany used to have until a couple of weeks ago, where they were trying not to engage on security issues, but engage through multilateral institutions and engage through commerce with countries. And now Japan is getting very serious about its military capabilities and really stepping up. The problem that Japan, and we're about to get a new Japanese national security strategy shortly, and so Japan is under very strict constitutional guidelines that the United States imposed on Japan at the end of World War II, that as well as some practices Japan has that, and so they can't have offensive, they can only have defensive systems, not offensive systems. But there are times when you need offensive systems in order to promote defensive measures, and the Japanese Diet is discussing these issues right now, and they're particularly concerned about China's growing nuclear program, which poses a major threat to Japan, as does the Taiwan contingency, which is a direct threat to the security of southwestern Japan. Did I answer the second question, Emma? But the United States, we have more troops on the ground in Japan than in any other country, and that will continue going forward. Our presence is critical for our ability to project power in Asia. It's also critical for our ability to defend Japan, but it is more important for the Japanese to learn to defend themselves as we then focus more on power projection throughout the region.
So my question is about North Korea. I've heard very often that a lot was going on there, and now it seems really quiet. So I'm just wondering if North Korea still wants to send their rockets over to try to attack us, if they're planning to do that, and if it does happen, will it cause another war?
No, it's a great question. North Korea originally would have been before Ukraine, it was definitely going to be a focus of talk. The North Koreans have had both a nuclear program and a ballistic missile program in place for some time. It is a regime that views the regime's survival as absolutely tied up with its nuclear program. And I think that the North Koreans, like a number of other rogue nations, have learned the lesson that Muammar Gaddafi taught them, which Gaddafi gave up his nukes in Libya during the Bush administration in a very finely orchestrated set of negotiations, but giving those up didn't exactly save Mr. Gaddafi when his own people came to do him in. And so they view the nuclear program as their lifeline and their ability to project their power more broadly and to get global attention. The Trump administration President Trump had sort of, and I think he did this a lot of times on policy, he had a notion of squaring the circle. And so on the one hand, President Trump talked about fire and fury, that he was going to bomb Pyongyang. But at the same time, he also talked about building beachfront condominiums, bringing economic resources into North Korea in order to transform the country. And I think the president often did that. He would often take policy ideas that were, say, on one end of the spectrum and combine them with ideas on the other end of the spectrum and try to come up with a synthesis that could force negotiations and lead to change. In the situation in North Korea, it did not. Very quickly on, after during the second summit, it became clear that Kim Jong-un wasn't serious about abandoning his nuclear program, and the negotiations ended. The Biden team has tried repeatedly to engage the North Koreans without success, in a whole bunch of areas, from helping battle the pandemic to other forms of emergency assistance. And the North Koreans continue to launch missiles. They just launched one last week again. It's a threat to the security of Japan. It is a threat to the security of the United States. It is a threat to the security of South Korea as well. But if the North Korean government does not want to engage with us and wants to pour its resources into these programs, the best thing we can do instead is to develop our missile defenses, which were significantly boosted during the Trump administration in a whole range of areas, including what's called boost phase missile defense, which was the notion that you could use aircraft to take out a missile as it was being launched and destroy it on the launch pad. So you'd have multiple layers of missile defense, satellite-based systems, as well as aircraft-based systems, and so as well as ground-based systems. So I think we're going to continue to build up our missile defenses, to do all we can to protect us and our allies from North Korea. Those systems are not without fault. They're not 100% foolproof, but I think that's the best we can do in this situation. While the problem is the humanitarian situation in North Korea is horrifying, massive starvation. There were some economic reforms early on in Kim Jong-un's reign, but those seem not to be bearing fruit.
Hello, thank you for your talk, and it's been great. As far as like a response to China and growing authoritarianism, would you see like say Biden's in the U.S. is quieter media presence and quieter presence in general, and just joining together with the rest of Europe and letting one voice and one response be the posture for like the Western world and democracy. Would that same strategy, do you think, work with growing authoritarianism around the world, like a more unipolar response to these kind of crises versus the self-interested, seemingly multi? Do you think so? What do you think about that? Thank you.
But I think it's. I guess I'd say the following: public diplomacy was certainly not Donald Trump's strength. I say that as an understatement, period. And but the truth is, the world is united. Looking at the images out of Ukraine in a way, and it's not just the West. It's not only democratic nations that have aligned on this issue and that have spoken up. And we've seen the scenes at the UN. You've seen the scenes around the world of protests around the world. It is. The notion of global unity against authoritarianism is a very positive thing. Period. I do not. With all due respect to President Biden, I don't think he exactly rallied the world when he talked about different sizes of incursions into Ukraine at his press conference. He's gotten better throughout, but this is a global public reaction to what is going on, and they're putting pressure on governments, including on the government of Germany, which is what led to the Zeitenwende, the change in German defense policy. So this is a mass public movement. It's like anything I think we've seen. I've certainly never seen anything in my lifetime. Maybe the Berlin airlift in 1948 was the last time we saw anything like this. We certainly. But it is a strong moment in the fight against authoritarianism. It is just a strong reminder of how fast the world can change when you let your deterrent down. Victoria.
How would you predict we're on day 12 of the war in Ukraine, or soon to be? If you had to look forward to day 24 or 30, where will we be?
Look, no, it's a great question. I mean, it's obviously a complete speculation. But look, my sense is that Vladimir Putin has no choice. He has to double down. That he can't sort of walk off now. And the question is, what other kinds of equipment does he bring in? And how does he continue to he obviously wants to have the Ukrainian people scared. He wants them to flee the country. He wants the government to fall. He would love to assassinate Zelensky. So the question really is, and I think the next couple of weeks are going to be critical to what happens in Ukraine. We'll find out whether we are going to be bogged down in a 10-year war of resistance with the Ukrainian people going into hiding, coming out, and taking action. Or we will find out, I do not see a way that, I don't have the creativity to think this through. I don't see a way that Putin is going to be willing to back out of this thing, because if he backs out, it's going to be almost impossible for him to survive as leader, I would suspect. The damage to Russia's prestige, the prestige of Russia's fighting forces, the damage to Russia's economy, the damage to the kleptocrats who are his key allies, it's been so massive. Look, the one sign, and I don't know if it's hopeful sign, was, we were talking about this before, was the fact that Prime Minister Naftali Bennett of Israel, who himself is a Sabbath observant Jew, flew to Moscow on the Sabbath, on Shabbat, which meant if he was doing that, he could only do that for one reason, which is a Jewish doctrine called Pekuach Nefesh, which is saving lives. And there clearly is some sort of, and he wouldn't have done this without the approval of the United States, without the approval of France, Germany, or the approval of the Ukrainians themselves, the Ukrainian government. The Israelis have a strangely close relationship with Russia, partly because of the large number of Russian Jews in Israel, but also because when President Obama refused to enforce the Red Line in Syria, and as Iran's presence in Syria, both during the Civil War and as Iran's presence in Syria grew and Russia came into Syria, Russia and Israel have been cooperating to try to put pressure on Iran and to push Iran back. And so they've had incredibly close intelligence sharing and military cooperation. It's not a secret. And so there is a relationship of trust with Israel. So, but what this leads to, who knows? But my real question at the end of the day is, it will be: is there a point at which which the generals in Russia turn their back on Putin? There's no orderly process for succession under Putin, under the Soviet Union. It was simple. You had the Politburo would vote. They removed Beria in 1953. They removed Khrushchev in 1964. There's no clear plan of succession. There's no process to remove Putin, and so who remains deeply isolated.
There we go. Okay, so the guest is asking, how important is the India factor? The Trump administration had warmed up with the Modi administration. Is India the new strategic partner for us?
I think there were huge hopes, and India was critical, and that having India, which itself has a long and challenging history with China, and saw major clashes in 1962 on its border, and saw major clashes just a couple of years ago in Ladakh with China and the Himalayas, that India would be there to help counterbalance China. India's taken some very strong actions, including banning many Chinese apps, including TikTok. And India obviously is a democratic nation with a strong technology, with strong technological capabilities, though obviously massive pockets of poverty and the like. But we've seen, but we have really yet to deeply engage the Indian military as far as we should with regard to the China challenge, and more importantly, we've been very disappointed by them with regard to Russia, where the old Russia-India alliance, which dates back decades, and the Russians are still a major arms provider to the Indians. The Indians refuse to criticize Putin for what's going on in Ukraine, and so there's now doubts within the Quad itself as to just how reliable India will be as a partner. And but India has huge capabilities. If we're India to wean itself away from its Russia policies and stand up as a democratic ally should, I think there would be huge capabilities because India has been deepening its defense ties with the French. It's been deepening its defense ties with the Australians. So there are all sorts of it's multiple layers of allies that India could play into. But we need greater trustworthiness on the Russia question.
Yeah, so my question was somewhat similar to the previous question about North Korea, but I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the Biden administration's strategy towards the Korean Peninsula. My understanding is that, especially recently, with the restarting of the Yongbyon nuclear reactor and increasing ballistic missile tests, that it's been sort of a lot of military, I guess, shows of force, but there hasn't been a whole lot of public engagement by the Biden administration.
And this will have to be the last question.
Sure. Look, let me first say this is an immensely complicated time on the world agenda. There are a lot of competing items for attention. And North Korea certainly comes up at State Department briefings and at DOD briefings. I'd say I think we're waiting on the results of the South Korean elections this coming week to see the shape of the new government in South Korea. That will also have a real impact on the kinds of engagements with North Korea that may be possible. I think the administration is wary of overly criticizing Kim Jong-un because of the desire to figure out a way to get to restart these negotiations, and also to try to figure out a way to get some humanitarian assistance in. The problem is that the lack of criticism is certainly taken in a certain way by Kim Jong-un. As is the attempt to really sort of restart the relationship. It just looks weak. It doesn't deter, and so I think we need to move to another stage in our policy with North Korea, which I suspect we will, through trial and error.
Thank you very much, Ken, for being here. Let me present a small token of appreciation for your coming to the University of Tennessee into Knoxville. We certainly got a broad-based education on issues across the planet, and appreciate you being here and sharing your thoughts with us. And thanks to all of you all for being here this evening, and we'll see you on May 2.